There is a moment that almost every man has experienced and almost no one talks about. You send a message and the reply comes back short. Just a few words. No warmth, no curiosity, nothing that tells you what she's actually feeling. And in that silence between her message and your next thought, something quiet and uncomfortable starts to move through you. You start replaying the last conversation. You start searching for the mistake you must have made. You start wondering if you misread the entire thing from the beginning. What most people don't realize is that this moment, the one filled with doubt and second guessing, is not actually about her. It's about a story you were taught to believe long before you ever met her. The story says that warmth is the only proof of interest. That if someone is pulling away, cooling off, or acting distant, it means they are losing feeling. But here is what matters. That belief, the one that feels so obvious, so instinctive, is often the exact opposite of what is really happening inside her mind. Stay with me here because this is where things become interesting. Think about the last time you cared about something so much that you became careful with it. Maybe it was a job you didn't want to mess up. Maybe it was a decision that mattered more than you let on. Notice what happened to your behavior in those moments. You likely became quieter, more guarded, more aware of every move you made. Not because you cared less, but because you cared more than you were willing to show. This is the part of human psychology that almost nobody applies to romantic attraction, even though it explains so much of what confuses us. Now picture her, sitting somewhere quiet, looking at her phone, deciding how to respond to you. Imagine the small war happening in her mind. A part of her wants to respond the way she truly feels. Another part of her is terrified of revealing too much, too soon, in case it changes everything between you. Coldness, in many cases, isn't absence of feeling. It is feeling that has nowhere safe to go. We'll come back to that, but before we go there, we need to understand something deeper about how emotional protection works in the human brain. When someone begins to develop real emotional investment in another person, their nervous system doesn't celebrate. It tightens. The brain interprets emotional vulnerability as a kind of risk, almost identical to physical risk. This is why people who are falling into real feeling often behave in ways that look like withdrawal. Their warmth becomes inconsistent. Their responses become shorter. Their humor becomes more reserved. Not because the feeling is fading, but because the feeling has become significant enough to threaten their sense of control. This is where most people get it backward. They believe that the person who texts the most, laughs the loudest, and shows affection constantly is the one who is most invested. But consistent, effortless warmth often signals comfort, not depth. It usually means the connection feels safe enough that there is nothing to protect. Distance, hesitation, and unpredictable energy often signal something far more significant happening underneath the surface. The mind doesn't guard things that don't matter. It guards what it's afraid to lose. There is something deeper happening here, and it has to do with the difference between performance and protection. Consider the moment when someone wants you to notice them, but is also afraid of being noticed too clearly. This contradiction creates behavior that looks confusing from the outside, but makes complete sense from the inside. She may seem distant in conversation, but remember small details you mentioned weeks ago. She may take longer to respond, but reread your messages more than once. She may act unaffected in front of others, but become unusually quiet when you're the only two people in the room. These are not contradictions. They are evidence of internal conflict. And internal conflict is one of the strongest indicators that someone is emotionally invested. Now we move deeper into the signs themselves, because once you understand the psychology behind them, the behaviors stop looking like rejection and start looking like something else entirely. The first sign is inconsistency in her energy. One day she seems warm and open. The next day she seems distant and unreadable. Most people interpret this as confusion or disinterest, but emotional consistency requires emotional safety, and people rarely feel fully safe with someone who matters to them in a new or uncertain way. Her inconsistency is often a reflection of how much your presence affects her internal state, not how little she cares about you. The second sign is overcorrection. This shows up as her trying too hard to appear unaffected. She might downplay a compliment instantly, or change the subject quickly when conversation turns personal. Overcorrection is rarely a sign of indifference. It's a sign of someone managing an emotional reaction they didn't expect to have. The third sign is memory. Pay attention to what she remembers about you. Small comments, certain stories, specific preferences you mentioned in passing. The mind doesn't store details about things it considers unimportant. If she recalls something you said weeks ago without being reminded, that memory is doing more talking than her words ever could. The fourth sign is mirrored distance. If you pull back slightly and she becomes noticeably more present, more curious, or more communicative shortly after, this is rarely coincidence. It often reflects an unconscious response to a shift in emotional balance, a signal that your presence matters more than her actions previously suggested. The fifth sign is selective vulnerability. She may seem guarded in general conversation, but occasionally let something slip, a worry, a fear, a piece of her inner world she doesn't usually share. People don't randomly hand pieces of their inner life to those who don't matter to them. Vulnerability is rationed, even unconsciously, and when it appears around you specifically, it's worth noticing. The sixth sign is comparison behavior. If she brings up other people in conversation in a way that seems to test your reaction, or watches closely how you respond when she mentions someone else, this often reflects an unspoken need to understand where she stands with you. People rarely seek this kind of reassurance from someone they feel nothing toward. The seventh sign, and the one that ties everything together, is emotional mirroring under pressure. When something stressful happens in her life and she instinctively reaches out to you, even briefly, even quietly, this reveals something words cannot. In moments of difficulty, people gravitate toward the presence that feels meaningful to them. If you are that presence, even occasionally, it tells you something her distance never could. But here is what matters most, and this is the deeper truth the entire script has been building toward. The real question was never whether she is interested. The real question is why you were taught to measure emotional depth using visible warmth instead of internal conflict. Most people grow up believing that love looks like ease, comfort, and constant affection, but real emotional significance often looks like hesitation, inconsistency, and quiet self-protection. The version of attraction we see in movies, smooth, certain, effortless, is not how complex emotional connection usually begins in real human beings. Real connection often begins in tension, not comfort. This means the coldness you've been interpreting as rejection might actually be evidence of something far more meaningful. Not because every cold moment hides secret feelings, but because emotional withdrawal is far more often a symptom of internal significance than indifference. The mind doesn't waste energy guarding things it doesn't care about. And this changes the question you should be asking entirely. Instead of asking, why is she acting distant? The deeper, more useful question becomes, what does it mean that her distance feels inconsistent rather than absolute? Indifference is steady. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't soften unexpectedly, then pull back again. What you've likely been witnessing isn't disinterest. It's an unresolved internal negotiation between wanting closeness and fearing what closeness might cost. This shift in understanding doesn't just change how you see her, it changes how you see yourself in this dynamic. You stop interpreting her behavior as a verdict on your worth, and you start recognizing it as a reflection of her own emotional process, one that has very little to do with whether you are enough and everything to do with how human beings protect the things that matter most to them. If this opens something for you, there is much more beneath the surface of how people actually communicate the feelings they're most afraid to show. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.